2,000 youth through speaking, coaching, and mentoring. He has inspired us for years. Welcome to METV Podcast with your host, Calvin T. Mann, the Encourager.
Don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the moonlight. Don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on the boogie. Welcome to METV. Yes, METV live with Dave and Heather on. Krista couldn't make it today. And we're going to talk about men and women working together. How important it is for us to have working relationships with men and women, right? We have a lot of division in this area, so we wanted to tackle it on a level that it's very, very important. Somebody's breathing into the. Thank you very much. So, we're gonna really get into this. So I want to tell this story, right? Because I remember the day that I knew I was gonna be fired at Northwest Airlines. Like this is how calculated it really was, right? When you were there, Northwestern knew how to get you out the way, right? So in other words, they would hire Dave, and Dave would be the one to get rid of Heather, right? So, right, they didn't want to deal with it because they would be dealing with they had that racism issue. They had already had issues before. So the great thing was we're going to hire your people to fire your people. So I remember as soon as this person became manager, I walked in the break room. I said, "It's over, guys." And it was like, "Cal," I said, "It's over. I'm out of here. They're going to get me out of here." And it was like, everybody was like, "Oh," because they gave me a black female boss. Now, mind you, she was right next to me. Many years worked with me. But once she got that power, I knew it was just a matter of time. Right? And that's how Northwest gets you out the way. Right? So one incident led to me being off the clock. My daughter get eczema. I come back on the clock. When I come back on the clock, that's who they give me as the manager. The union rep had already been fired from Detroit police for racial issues. So now he is a union rep. Those two walk in the room, and here I come in the room because it was another brother that was a manager that played in the NFL has, told her they sent me home sick. So when she came back off vacation, you know what her first task was? Me. So I get called in, I walk in, and immediately I was like, man, this is tough, right? Right away she said, oh, I feel threatened. The union rep said, man, you got to step out the room. 7 minutes later, they walk out that room. I was fired. Same union rep did not file my second step. So automatically, you knew you was a target. I knew I was a target. But what I was doing on the campus, I was helping people with their families. I was helping managers with their kids, right? I was helping ticket agents with their sons, right? I was helping a lot of people, right? And they had to get me out the way, right? But I go to that story because that was a sister that I worked with. I was a black woman who gained power that I worked with. And the thing that we have to be able to do in today's society is we have to be able to work together. There was no reason for you to really get me out the way, except for the fact that that's why you were hired. Right? So 11 years, employment gone. Right? And so we have to figure out how men and women can work together without it being violent, uh, without it being accusational, without it being a situation where uh, we both can get along and no one person has to be fired just because you come into power. And I really say power because a lot a lot of times that's what is happening. They're flexing a certain amount of power. So I want to turn in this conversation because men and women working together also falls under relationships. How we work together in our relationships. I was having a great conversation with my brother Tafiri, and we came to a real conclusion, a real understanding that when a man has purpose, the woman that he's with, she must have skill to handle a man that has purpose, and vice versa. A woman who has purpose must have a man in her life to have the skill to allow her to fulfill her purpose. So we got to figure out how we can work together. We got to figure out how relationships work. And we got to really figure out the dynamic of keeping us together. So with that being said, I'm going to say hello to Heather and Brother Dave. And we're going to go right to you, Heather, because women are your expert. This is what you do. And without me being just the mad rapper, the mad rapper is the guy that, hey man, they always do, they are the mad rapper. Without me being the mad rapper guy, um, how are you today? And lead us down this path of righteousness.
Well, I thank you for that. Absolutely. And I greet my fellow co-host today, our engineer and his awesomeness today. Always good to see your handsome faces and be in your good company. So I would like to start our conversation around how men and women can work together. So 3 things I would like for us to leave with today. The first one is about changing our mind. The second, changing our words. And the third is changing our actions. We're always talking about the thought, the word, and the deed. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper. And I want to talk about the areas by which we change. And so the first is respect. The second is value. And the third is reciprocity. So it comes down to respecting authority, whomever is the person with it, valuing the roles that we play. And the last one is the reciprocity of the source, where your true payment, where your true rewards and consequences lie. So that's how I want to move forward in our conversation today. So I'll stand. Was it stand down, Dave? Is that the right term?
Yeah, stand down.
I'll yield to my brother Dave.
Yeah, hey Heather, how you doing? Hey Calvin,
Good, thank you.
how you doing? Glad to see everybody. Yeah, it's ironic you said respect. I think the 3 components I want to put in is first is one is trusting oneself. This is about a certain level of self-confidence. 2, exercising servant leadership. We as people, whether you're in a relationship that is a courtship or a marriage, there's times we're going to serve and there's times you're going to lead. And trust will be a key aspect in all that. And 3, being able to follow through on developing that equally yoked concept. I think that sometimes we're so apart in so many ways, not just in a relationship of husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, but even when you walk into an environment. We understand there are roles we have to play, and those roles may hold leadership. Usually when people come in and they come in to terminate someone, most people operate out of fear. So we need to be able to help people to feel comfortable. See, what should have probably played out in Calvin's scenario was to sit down and gain understanding. And that's my third piece. Do you have understanding? In good leadership, the key component in that is being able to understand yourself and others. This leads into emotional intelligence. So we'll go with that. Turn it back over to you, Cal. Or Heather.
No, that's good. So we're gonna get right into it. And the three things that we're gonna make sure is solution, solution, and solution. So when you come out of this, you'll have three solutions that will be provided that will help you. So we're gonna move right to you, Heather, right
Okay.
away. In your first take, um, how do you navigate that very first take? Because again, we have so many people, as Dave talked about as well. We have so many people. Vindictiveness is on the table, retaliation, and I gotta tell you, retaliation was on the table for me, but God, all I can say was God showed up and showed out. Look at my life now. Like, the intent for the firing was to harm me, and God turned around and wow, my life has taken on a whole new meaning. And so maybe she was used to move me, but let's get into your first subject.
Okay. So the first one has to do with the respect of authority. Part of the respect of authority is learned behavior. So some of this is, of course, it's going to come from our meridian path, which is our backstory, how we were raised, the values that we were raised with, and our understanding of that value translated into the role of the role that we play. So when you are a parent, your parent is the authority figure. The teacher is the authority figure. The police officer is the authority figure. And I think sometimes where we have to reflect and reconnect to our own beliefs and values. It's actually, I call it the past history, present mystery. Those things that are in our past are the things that set the precedence for our beliefs, our actions, and our present. However, if you've never questioned those values and where they came from, as an adult, then those values and beliefs that you had as a child or a youth follow into your active life today, because it's never gone challenged, or you've never established that it may be what you believe or don't believe. And so I think that part of changing our minds has to do with really looking at that backstory. Where did those ideas come from? So when I think about authority figures, where did that come from? And typically, as a child or a youth, those people who are your authority figures typically are your parents, your teachers, law enforcement. I think those are the probably around the most. Of course, you have your grandparents and things like that, but those people are the where you get the actual ideas about authority and the respect for them. So if you tend to, even now more often, if you tend to look at the behaviors and the actions of who are now in the role of parent, who is now in the role of teacher, who now in the role of police officers, it really has a lot to do with undermining the authority and the respect that you have based on the conduct and behaviors that we have found are not necessarily appropriate for the trust that Dave mentioned that you would have in authority. You're supposed to be able to go to those people and those roles that they play and the authority that they have to be able to be safe, to able to get good advice and guidance. So and to establish, the understanding and the value that you have for yourself and where you fit in that whole picture. You want to be accepted, you want to be respected, And we have been taught to respect authority. So that would even go into, if you were raised in a church, you had to respect. It was a matter of respecting the church leadership. It was a matter of uh, respecting the doctors because they knew best for you. They knew best for your health. And so I think we have come into a time where the ideas that were initially attached to what we consider authority have, a lot of them have been abused, so that trust has been lost. And so the respect for authority then spills over into gender roles. So then, depending on the relationship you have with your mother, who was a parent, if it was a woman that was your teacher, if it was a law enforcement officer that was a male, that may start to make you question men in general, women in general, and lose that amount of authority or the respect that you have for authority based on what you've seen and experienced from them. We tend to say, if this happened by a male or a female, then this is going to happen next. And we start to put up our defenses, and the roles that we're supposed to respect and value then begin to decrease. The other a process that I think would be the second one for me around the value of those roles that we play. I think, again, as we look at our past history leading up to our adult decisions, I believe that past history um, is going to have an impact on our present understanding of the value of the roles that we play. So if you had a bad experience with, again, it was a gender specific experience, um, that may also impact what you think, how you act towards them, how you speak towards them. And as you continue to move in those directions, we also sometimes can continue to apply the identity of the person instead of valuing the roles that they play. So when we start looking at uh, the person connected directly to the roles, I think that's when we have some additional challenges. When we were growing up, it wasn't about necessarily the person. It was about the respect and the value of the role that they played. You didn't have to like your teacher, but you had to respect them. They were still the authority figure in the classroom, in the school, and the same thing for a parent, right? Regardless of what you might experience from your parent, they were still your parent, and you were expected, and it was reinforced that the role that I play and the value of this role as parent in the household means that I'm responsible for you. I'm responsible for this household. I'm responsible for maintaining it. And again, and depending on the culture, that your family culture that you were raised in, that was either mother, father, grandmother, grandfather. And so oftentimes I think that is a part of our value or lack of value, and also the respect. And then the third area is your understanding of where your true source comes from. Who's ultimately responsible? First, it's yourself, and then it is whomever you're engaging. But ultimately, as we look for guidance, understanding, wisdom, and you're rooted and grounded in something that has some substance to it, God, your source. I'm referring to it as source right now. But if you have your source, then you always have that to refer back to. And when you talk about reciprocity, you're talking about the whole concept of you reap what you sow. It's about who ultimately owes and pays the debt for when you fall short or someone else falls short. And I think, of course, for me, that kind of dips into that spiritual economy, but I'm going to just try to stay in this lane for today. So understanding that there are always consequences. Those consequences might be rewards or punishments. So understanding that however you respond, whatever your action and whatever responses or actions are given back to you, there's still a debt to be paid, and it will be paid. So we talk about the law or the consequence of reaping and sowing, so that regardless of what you might experience today or what you experienced yesterday, you never really get away with anything. So if you're thinking that, like you were talking about in the instance of the two people who more casually created the devastation for you in your workplace, they still have to account for that. Even though they had the authority to do it, there is a way to do it, and you're still accountable when you say you have your source. Universally, it's going to come back to you anyway. But when you say and declare that you have a source, that you believe a certain way, those things ultimately have to be repaid. So you tallied up a debt in that instance. How is that debt going to be repaid? So it's going to be repaid, even if you are one that's not knowledgeable of how it was repaid. There are consequences. Those consequences have punishments and rewards. So it did not go unpunished. And just like those things that we do that add to people, not just take from them, those things also have rewards. And sometimes you're able to see those rewards, sometimes you're not. So I tie these three things back into the change that we have to make. We have to have some consciousness about what we are thinking about other people, whether it's gender, whether it's the roles that they play, and understanding whether we're doing right by someone or we're causing harm to someone. Ultimately, that's going to have to be repaid. So we have to put that into our mindset and our choices and our decisions, that whatever we're doing, saying, and thinking will ultimately come back to us. So we have to be careful about changing our minds about the judgments that we place on other people based on the roles that they play, whether that's gender induced or not. So I think the first lesson in bringing men and women together to work together in the workplace and in relationships are going to be really evaluating what our thoughts are, really evaluating. So that means you have to give some context to it, thinking back into your family history about respect and what that looked like in terms of the authorities or people who have authority, and then being able to share that if you're in a partnership with a mate, if you're in a partnership with a coworker that is a male or female, that's going to be a very important tool. That the idea of the authority that a person has is ultimately going to be more important and connect to the level of respect that you have for them if you're looking at the authority role, not just the person themselves, but the role that they play. I think part of our change is going to have to go to that level of value for each other. And then also how you speak to people. Are you speaking to them in a way that they can receive what you're saying? Are you speaking to them like saying all women do this, and so because you're a woman, I know you're going to do this and do that? Well, that's not a show of respect for the person that you're connecting with, just because of their gender. I think if we are able to better understand that people ultimately just want to have value, they want to be respected for who they are. I think all of those things are important. And if we have that, if we don't have that in place, understanding the authority and the roles that the person plays is ultimately going to be more important than who you think that person is, or and then being able to step out and allow the course of whatever has to happen in terms of the reciprocity of it. You are not the punisher. You do have some, of course, you have feelings, you have say so in that, but being able to ultimately not be the judge and jury when we don't have all the information. We don't always have all the information about why people do what they do. We don't know if it's a mental health challenge that's involved. We don't have all the backstory. And so we have to be careful and tread lightly. And those are times where we have to trust our source.
Awesome. Brother Dave.
Well said, Heather. You covered a lot of points, and I'll just inject that. And most times when we're giving solutions, we should like to ensure people that this is a process, a part of the journey, because solutions sometimes are applicable in the time that you hear them, and sometimes you have to put them on the back burner, and sometimes you have to discard them. But it's a process. And so when I talked about developing trust, it kind of leads into what Calvin was saying and what you were saying, Heather, in regards to relationships and how we can work together as men and women. From a personal standpoint, I really don't do gender. I recognize gender, race. I recognize that it exists, but I try to look at people as just a host or a spiritual being housed in a body with a mind, will, of emotion. But sometimes that's difficult because people need tangible things. When Jesus came, he came to work with the people for where they were at, and then he proceeded to teach the spirituality. So when I talk about developing trust in line to what you were saying, Heather, trust has to start with self. As you talked about our background, when we get information from our families, our friends, associates, what have you, that is the early years of our development. We're building a foundation. But sometimes when we get that information, it's limited. And we don't question whether or not that information should be challenged. And not in a negative way, but to be challenged in us to keep evolving and growing. So the way you thought when you were 8 years old is not the way you think when you're 18. And when you turn 28 and the eights keep going on, right? And so what I like to tell people, the first way of being able to interact with someone else is to have the relationship with yourself. You have to learn to trust yourself. And let's go back to the source. We'll use your terminology, Heather. And when you go back to the source begins to help you to understand how to trust yourself because it begins from the inside out, not the outside in. But too often, we always relate to the external factors. We relate to people, places, and things. They all have their place. But as we evolve to grow as people, as we grow as men and women, we have to look at it from the inside out, trusting ourselves. Well, how do you develop that? You have to begin to first start seeking out understanding, being able to decipher the information that you have. That comes from various sources, whether it is from someone who possesses wisdom and knowledge, that could be your parents, the teachers, all the positions that you talked about, or it could be you going and doing your own research. But it comes a point that what I find with us as human beings, we spend so much energy entertaining the outside sources that we don't develop the inside. And once you begin to develop inside out, basically, as I said something to Calvin earlier, who are you? You know, when you turn 18, who is that 18-year-old? Who is that 18-year-old David? Who is that individual? You know, have I been observing myself, my actions, my words, my deeds? Have I been making that observation? Again, I go back to we spend so much energy with the fingers pointed outward that we don't take the time to see what's inside. So you have to do an observation of yourself on an ongoing basis. For me personally, every day I reevaluate myself all the time. Because again, the information that I've learned in that 86,400 seconds in a day is all going to be something I have to decipher out. We're so busy moving. We don't take time. That's why they tell us to meditate. Because when we meditate, we get outside of ourselves and we begin to go inside of ourselves. I was at the gym the other day and I was doing some exercise. Then I laid down and I went right into meditation. I was so gone that I forgot where I was at. So one of my buddies tapped me and said, "Hey," I said, oh, I lost myself because I got into what I was doing. See, once we begin to start to center in on the inside out, we begin to develop that understanding of who we are. If you notice, most of the time, a lot of the relationships that people get caught up in is what you said, external factors, race, gender, previous experiences. But if you will evaluate yourself from the inside out, you will learn that those experiences were life lessons. As Calvin mentioned earlier, those life lessons didn't become a curse. They became a blessing because they taught him lessons on how to prepare for the next challenges that he would face. This is what this journey is all about. Life ain't nothing but problems and solutions. So the next piece that I like to cover is to being a servant. And in leadership, when we talk about jobs or working together, I look at servant leader. As an individual, these are powerful positions when you're a servant. People think of being exercise servitude is you being walked over like John Doorman, but it really is a sign of strength. An individual who can humble themselves as Jesus did. Jesus went down to wash Peter's feet. Now, we just use the characters for those that may not on social media, may not identify with the Bible. Let's just go with that. But let's use the principle. He went to wash down a man's feet. Now, we know I've lived in these countries and we know that they wore sandals, so they didn't have the best looking feet, if you will. They wasn't kept up, what have you, because they're out in the wilderness, right? But he humbled himself to wash the feet. And the individual, Peter, said, "Oh, no, don't do this," because it was somewhat a disgraceful move. But Jesus understood the side of humility, back to knowing yourself. When you know yourself, you don't mind humbling yourself. See, you don't mind yourself, you don't mind humbling yourself to understand that the role, position, the status that you're in, you're defining it. It's not defining you. You see, as Calvin said earlier, that person lost sight because they let the role define them. They didn't, basically, I know he had to tell the story quickly, but they didn't sit down and talk to Calvin. They already made a decision because the role was defining them. And that's what we get caught up in: position, places, money, all these things. But you can't allow that to happen. So when you move into the role of servitude, there's a level of humility because there's an inner strength that's given to us. Once you understand that role of servitude, now you can move into the next position of leadership. What does that mean? That means you're supposed to provide guidance, direction, wisdom, knowledge from the lessons you learn through the experiences. This helps to elevate, motivate, encourage that person who is basically in that moment following your leadership. That goes back to my earlier part. They have no problem with you because they trust you. You see what I'm saying? So all this comes together. And how do you do this? Because now, again, back to you understanding yourself, because the Bible tells us in all things, get understanding. It don't say be right. It don't say be wrong. It say get understanding. Why you need that understanding? Because understanding helps you to be able to bring the wisdom that you got and rightfully discern it and put things in its proper perspective. So now I'm not caught up in my past experience of the individual I chose to date. And they just did not have the maturity level. And I like to look at people. There are some other aspects, mental health issues and those concerns. But I like to look at what level of maturity is that individual at? Not to insult them to say, oh, they're like a child. But even in moments, we may have the child mentality because we don't have the knowledge and wisdom and understanding of the role we may be in. When Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child, I acted as a child. But when I became a man, what he's talking about is maturity. I put off childish ways. See, when I dealt with someone I had to terminate or someone I had to reprimand, we always say praise in public, punish behind closed doors. But I didn't go into the punishment role. I went straight into the development role because then I wanted them to walk away with understanding what we were doing here and how you got in position. Then that would have them to walk away to understand themselves so they don't repeat the behavior. So all these things are essential, if you will, developing trust, developing a servant leader attitude. And even in a marriage, somebody's going to lead at time. Somebody's going to be the servant. And see, I was thinking about you two, Calvin and Heather, and I thought to myself in a relationship. And I said, now here's what I've always believed. If the husband woke up thinking, what can I do for my wife? That's his mission when he wake up. Because remember, you stood before God and you said, this is what I'm going to do. And the wife wake up and said, what I'm going to do for my husband. What you have here is an exchange of two people giving. There's only room for receiving. But if you look up and you wake up with the Janet Jackson attitude and say, what have you done for me lately? You have a giver and a taker. And what does that mean? You have division. See, once a relationship developed that understanding and that trust and who could not trust you if you're waking up trying to, if you will, reasonably satisfy that individual? Because back to that individual development, you got to know yourself first. Because if you don't know yourself, it's still going to be conflict no matter how much a person do for you because you're in an internal battle. So those are the key points I wanted to bring out. Is that me? Yeah.
I think you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't hear him.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I love the fact I'm sorry. So I love the fact that you guys have went there, but I'm saying I love how it goes into the various areas. Now, when we talk in solutions, right? One of the three components that most definitely you guys touched on, but how do I do that, right? How do I have respect for my mate or my coworker?
Oh, great.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And really it is really respecting the person of what they bring to the table. But you have to be good at evaluating and not evaluating to dispose. Many times we evaluate, as you said, as you put, Brother Dave, like we evaluate to dispose. So you can't have a relationship if you have a giver and a taker, right? You can't value that. It's going to be tough
Mm-hmm.
because somebody is going to be without, which we see today, right? When you look at today's economy and market, there are a lot of successful women,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you look at it from a male perspective, even today we speak negatively about the men. Now, when you get into these jobs, and this is not just something that I discovered today,
Mm-hmm.
but when the roles were reversed, it's the same. So now the roles are the reverse. They're acting the same way that they did in the 60s. The only difference is it is a woman. So
Mm-hmm.
what we have to do is we have to come to an understanding that, first of all, power only reveals who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
When you get this power, it only says, okay, I'm Calvin, I got this power. Right away, you're fired. You're fired, right? Because I want to exercise the right to really harm someone's well being because I didn't listen. I didn't get an understanding of who they are. And the fact is I was brought in here to get rid of them anyway. So what we have to do is respect is always on the table. Respect is everything. So respecting each other immediately has to be the very first thing that we do. And when I mean respect, I mean first have some self-respect, right? That there are things that we will and will not do, right? That's the first thing. Have some self-respect. Then you can apply respect to other people, right? Just like we do the mantra for Respect Day: respect me, respect you, respect we. If I respect myself, automatically I'll begin to understand and respect you because I know what it looks like in respecting myself. So we have to understand that that has to be on the table, number one. The second solution I want to make clear is personality and personality traits. You have to take a look at who, what, when, where, and why, and how it fits. Heather does things around personality traits and how they can fit the different components, knowing who's in the room, knowing who's not, right? Just because this person is this way doesn't mean that they have to be fired because you can't have 12 Calvins in the room. You gotta have a Calvin, a Dave, a Crystal, a L. You got to have um, different people to build a team. And you got to know who's on that team. So the second solution is understanding that being different doesn't mean you have to get rid of me. Being different means I have to come to an understanding of who you are and how you fit in this team and the concept. Also, I think that is very, very important. And the third solution that I'm going to make clear, all of America has to get a better idea about men. America has to take a look, and society and everybody has to take a look at how valuable and what men bring to the table. I say this often, all the time. We are more than a penis in the paycheck. We are way more than a penis in the paycheck. And so you have to get an understanding of what men bring to the table and vice versa. Men have got to begin to look at women in a way besides an object. It's very, very important that we stop looking at women as objects and value their intelligence, especially if it's empathetic and understanding, right? And it comes with that component. We do too much of as men and women. Now today, the man suits so tight, and so the woman is objectifying the man now, right? Now you're the new woman and don't even realize it, but your suit so tight, you see, and vice versa. We have to begin to evaluate and value people for character, the peace that they bring, how they carry themselves, and stop evaluating them on, oh, he ugly or she fat or all. We got to stop that. So that's the third solution, is really start taking a look at people for who they are, what they can bring to the team. Stop looking at people just because they look a certain way and don't fit, and you got this judgmental process. Stop looking at people, and this way, men and women can work together, and maybe we learn some things about one another, right? Maybe I discover in this person a friend, because the Bible tells us a friend, it can be closer than a brother. So we need to understand how important that really is. Those three solutions will allow us, men and women, to work together. You guys hit it on the nail, and nailed it. And I go through relationships because, like me and Dave, we always talk about, Heather, you always talk about, look at the longevity of the friendships that you have. They weren't always perfect people, but they were your friends, right? And you can work with them, and you do, right? But they know you, and you know them, and you have this situation that really is important. So just getting clear to that, and I wanted to make sure that we did touch on the solutions. I want to throw out there, in this case, we're winding down, so you guys each have a few minutes to close before we close out. But recently, Dave, right, I went to some men to send, right, advice to males, and I'm very proud of what's coming in, and people understanding that this is important, that we send this message to young men for the book. So I'm proud of that. But I want you, each one of you, to touch on, and Dave, we'll start with you first. Your last take, and you got a couple minutes.
My last take is in collaboration with what you said. It's important that we get to know each other. If we're going to look at gender, we need to understand the gender a little more broader than the narrow perspective we're walking with. I often would say that the pendulum has swung from the other side, where men were the dominant source. Now the women are taken in the same position. And the same things that they dislike the most, now they're starting to display themselves. But I always believe that women were never the weaker source, or never the weaker species, if you will. I always felt that they had, if not equal power, more power. And the reason they got shut down, because you had alpha males who had, just like when they went to Africa, even though we traded out ourselves, they had weaponry, so they had more power to maneuver people and operate on that base of fear. Well, now the pendulum has swung the other way, so now our females are stepping up, and this goes across the ethnicity line, that we as people now are losing sight of who we are as people. And again, when we do this division based on race and gender, what have you, we sometimes keep the division going, and the house can't come together. So the key point, to bring closure to my point, is it's significant that once you develop that trust within yourself, then you can respect everybody else. And you need to define these terms that you use. That's another part. We use a lot of words, but when you ask people the meaning of their words, they're so far in variation of what the meaning is, that how can I respect someone if someone says, well, you didn't respect me because you stepped on my shoe, and it was just an accident. Well, see, he or she has a different meaning of it. Once we break terminology down and come to some meeting of the minds, we can use these terms such as trust, respect, understanding in a more concise way, and be able to work together. So that's my point.
Sister Heather.
Are you yielding to me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the relationships, the intimate relationship components for men and women being able to work together, we have to get, I think, beyond some of the more basic understanding of each other. Our physiology is different but complementary. We are by divine design made to complement and fit together perfectly. We somehow have come up with ways to offset that fit so it's always offset. And I think, Dave, you mentioned the term equally yoked earlier in your sharing. And I think that when we talk about being equally yoked, that we need to think, we really need to think more about what is it that I need as that complement. We start to think more about what I want in terms of material, the material world or the material realm, and we miss the areas that we as women need to be complimented. I think, and sometimes men miss where they need to be complimented. And when we start looking just at physical attraction, it absolutely is amazing to have that kind of level of attraction for another person. But in the event those physical things are changing, shifting, growing, moving, shrinking, all the things that happen to a body as it grows in seasons, do you still have what's needed to gel that relationship? Do you still have the glue that holds it together, the ties that bind, truly bind? And I think those, what we've come away from a lot of times is finding the complements. And because we start looking with these physical eyes and limiting what our complements look like, spiritually look like for you. If you don't have someone who's also spiritually grounded and you are spiritually grounded, eventually that fit or what you perceive as a good fit, and typically, and I'll speak to myself and even the women in my family, we always had the thought that we could always make our mate, prospective mate's life better. And if we just made his life better, then he could love me the way that I needed to be loved. And so our lens was skewed, not just because we were looking at the potential of what he could be, but not just the measure of who he is. And I think that's where we kind of lost sight, and personally, where I lost sight, I was always looking at what he had the potential to become, and not who he was in those moments. Because potential takes cultivation, potential takes patience, potential takes divine intervention and guidance, and I can't control any of those things. I have to be mindful of the man that is before me, not just the one to come. And so I think we often think in reverse, and we think about the man to come as opposed to the one that's in front of us. We think that we can change somebody. And I think vice versa. There are some men who also think that they can change the woman. They can tone her down if she has a wilder nature or a freer spirit or a freer just nature. That man, because he loves her, thinks that that's enough. And I can tame her and I can train her and I can make her be this, this person I have this ideal in my mind for her to be. And I think that's where we both get off with this expectation instead of having the value and appreciation for the person in front of you, and then recognizing if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You can't force that fit. And but the basis of that is having the foundational knowledge about where that compliment is for you. So that requires self love, that requires self work, that requires self worth. And so if you have those things working in your favor, I think we have a better chance of having healthier relationships and men and women who can work better together.
Thank you both. Um, yes, all of that, right? And again, because I think we get into our own ways, because even we have a self ego, and we have this ego from from other things. But I really want to close with, it is important, it really is important for us to really cultivate healthy relationships right now more than ever. Our children are dying at alarming rates. We're watching um, the foster care system with over 40,000 kids in it. Um, we have a system that is $1 billion system that helps keep, and we're all participating in it, fathers from their children, children's from their fathers, and vice versa in some cases. We, uh, we are navigating in a situation that is partially a half done situation. So I have half of my kids. I have spent time with you. I have care for you. I have want you. I have can afford you. I have need you. And so nothing is whole. Men and women working together is so important because co-parenting is a real thing. We have a child, we must learn to work together. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is not to communicate with my kid's mom. That's tough, right? Because we're not on the same page. And that doesn't really work. So the kids get half love, they get half treatment, and they get half circumstances where they're only going to get half an answer. We cannot continue to half ass our way with each other. We need far too much wholeness in our relationships, for our children, the whole nine. I think it's important that we really begin to look at the whole concept. Fathers back in the home, cooperation with two people in raising children. Money is not your God. I just met with a man who gave up a $130,000 job to make 84 and to take care of both his parents and his family and his wife and children. That's a $50,000 loss. And some people be like, no way, I ain't taking no $50,000 loss. You have to do this and break up a whole family for a contract. We have to get ourselves back to a whole approach. We're family. Again, Brother L, a family being put together and it being first. Where I come from, out of a home come 216 bodies. My cousin interviewed me the other day. When you get into this whole dynamic, I'm only here having this conversation, right? Because I have got raised. I had a lot of men in my life who filled in the gap where my dad couldn't be there. Hence why we mentor. But we got to get to a wholeness. And God has to be the center of that wholeness. Now, I didn't say what religion, but God has to be the center of that wholeness. And you got to find that. You got to locate that. You got to know for sure how important that is. I need to be able to work with my sister and not put my hands on her or not disrespect her or talk under her clothes. I need to be able to work with my brother and not condemn him and not call him names and not harm him. I need to be able to work with my coworkers so we can get this project done and not come home and talk about all the negativity and walk into a home where there is wholeness, peace when you go home. Stop letting money be the division that destroys your children. Men and women can work together. We have to. It is very important. And today, you guys so eloquently shared solutions, concepts, and I pray that you all who are watching get this information, apply it to your children, apply it in your homes, and grow. With that being said, thank you, Brother Dave. Thank you, Heather Miller. Looking forward to your workshop August 29th. I'm so proud of you and the work that you do for women, and I thank you. And Brother L, thank you for being consistent, man. And you all remember one thing: God give you a man, God give you a woman. Sometimes you don't get a second chance to love. So you better get the tools and the information that you need to make the one love that you get last. My name is Calvin Mann, president and founder of Encouragement Young. Peace.